Good afternoon. Welcome to the press conference with EVP Dombrovskis on the presentation of the trade policy review that has been just adopted today and that you should have already received. We have the pleasure of having the EVP with us today. So please, we can start with a brief introduction and then we will go to the questions.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Today, the Commission is pleased to set the new course of European trade policy. This communication will be our key reference document for the coming years. Europe is rethinking the role of trade and trade policy in a world characterized by more geopolitical conflict and economic upheaval. Let me say three key words that define our strategy: open, sustainable, assertive. It is around those three concepts that we will want to build a new consensus. We reached out to EU governments, the European Parliament, businesses, civil society and citizens. What we found is a clear expectation that trade policy should serve our people and our values, as well as supporting growth and job creation. We need to strengthen Europe's focus on multilateralism. We want a global rulebook that is up-to-date, fair and sustainable. We need a trade policy that supports Europe's wider ambitions. We aim to transform our economy to achieve climate neutrality and boost our competitiveness in a well-regulated digital market. Our strategy must support our workers and businesses, and it will shore up our defenses against unfair trade practices. We need open trade more than ever to support our recovery from COVID-19 crisis. Already, 35 million jobs in the EU depend on trade, and these are high-quality jobs. Competitive gains from global trade have increased wages by 12%. We believe there is a potential to build on this strong foundation, but to do so, we must look outside our borders. This is economic reality. 85% of global growth will take place outside Europe in the next decade. So, even if the current crisis feeds the temptation to look inward, this is not the answer. The EU has substantial trade surplus, so by turning inward, we can only make our economic outlook worse. The right answer to ensure Europe's prosperity is to keep trading with our global partners. We have a strong network of trade agreements to help us, 46 deals with 78 partners. Therefore, while we aim to ratify the agreements and complete ongoing negotiations, we will put stronger focus on extracting maximum value from existing deals. This will help our companies, in particular our SMEs, to find new opportunities and to speed up the recovery. We must not forget that 2 out of 3 jobs in Europe are provided by SMEs. But for global trade to work, it must be underpinned by proper global rules. The World Trade Organization has for decades provided the stability that is necessary for trade to expand, allowing countries to develop by integrating into global economy. But global rulebook is outdated. It no longer guarantees a level playing field. It does not respond to the sustainability and digital challenges. Accordingly, we have published a detailed EU agenda for reform of the WTO. Of course, it is only by developing a strong coalition with our partners that we will succeed. With a new administration in Washington and with a confirmation of Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala as a new Director General of the WTO, we believe we can create new momentum for positive change. The WTO reform concerns all 3 its core functions: negotiation, monitoring and deliberation, and dispute settlement, including a functioning appellate body. Trade policy must play its full role in the green and digital transformation of the EU and global economy. Our communication outlines ways that trade can support sustainability. These include a trade and climate initiative at the WTO, seeking agreement on climate neutrality in our trade and investment deals with G20 countries, making full use of our trade deals to accelerate cooperation on climate action, biodiversity, and sustainable food systems. Future deals will include Paris climate commitments as essential elements. Promoting sustainable trade also means stepping up our support for labor rights through the development of due diligence legislation, including determined action to combat forced labor. Meanwhile, to drive our digital transformation, the EU must play a central role in creating the right rules for digital trade, both at the WTO level and working closely with key partners like United States. We will make a proposal for a Trade and Technology Council centered on transatlantic leadership. Our strategy avoids digital protectionism. In this regard, the trade and cooperation agreement we concluded with the UK points the way forward. It is the first EU deal containing ambitious rules on data flows while ensuring that our high privacy standards and the GDPR are fully protected. The strength of our global relationship will be critical for achieving our wider goals. We already proposed a fresh transatlantic agenda to pave a way for a reset with the Biden administration. We want to rapidly resolve our trade disputes and restore EU-US leadership as an engine for positive global change. This work can proceed on parallel tracks. We can work at bilateral level to resolve trade irritants while advancing fast on multilateral reforms. The bottom line is simple. Whatever challenges the EU and the US face, there is no stronger values-based alliance in the world. On China, the EU goal is to restructure our partnership to be reciprocal, balanced, and fair. Our recent investment agreement demonstrates our readiness to level the playing field, not least for EU companies in China. While the comprehensive agreement on investment can address many issues, it is not panacea to deal with all the challenges presented by China. We will work closely with like-minded partners, including the United States, on issues of concern like human rights and forced labor. Closer to home, we'll step up our engagement with our neighborhood region and Africa. These countries are geographically close, with strong economic and cultural ties to Europe. Moreover, they have long-term strategic and economic growth prospects. We will therefore build closer trade and investment partnership with them to our mutual benefit. We do not forget, of course, our commitment to other parts of the world, particularly the burgeoning Asia-Pacific region, the source of so much future economic growth. We reaffirm our commitment to conclude the series of FTAs with the partners in the region, notably with Australia and New Zealand. And we will continue to advance our work on Latin and Central America, where we are working towards the ratification of deals with Mercosur and Mexico, and we are also committed to conclude an agreement with Chile. The EU will be more assertive in pursuing our interests and protecting ourselves from unfair trade practices. Europe plays by the rules, and where necessary, we will be proactive in upgrading those rules. Our WTO reform plan will address issues such as competitive neutrality, subsidies, and state-owned enterprises. But we also need to strengthen our own capacity to level the playing field and defend ourselves when our partners do not play by the rules. This will include preparation of the anti-coercion instrument and exploring options for an EU strategy for export credits. We will also be doing more on implementation and enforcement. European businesses and workers need to benefit from the agreements that we have negotiated. We will develop new tools to support our companies, particularly SMEs, and we must ensure that our partners respect their commitments, both on market access and on environmental and labor rights. Already last year, we appointed a Chief Trade Enforcement Officer and upgraded the EU enforcement regulation. This shows our willingness to take a tougher approach, and we will follow through. We are also conducting a review of our action plan to make the implementation and enforcement of trade and sustainable development chapters more effective. The results of this review will help us to determine our next steps. To conclude, ladies and gentlemen, this communication presents a distinct European approach that we call open strategic autonomy. We believe a new consensus on trade policy is necessary, both within the EU and at the global level. This communication is a strong basis to engage with our partners in building that consensus. Thank you.
Thank you very much, EVP. Now I open the floor to questions. The first one is Anna. Anna, please.
Hi, thank you. Commissioner Dombrovskis, you told us that sustainable is one of the 3 key words for the new trade policy. I'd like to know how it affects the trade agreement with Mercosur. And also, a lot of members have already stated that they will not ratify this agreement as it is. So I'd like to know if there are concrete measures to get this agreement through all those criticisms and denials. Thank you so much.
As regards EU-Mercosur deal, as I already outlined in introductory remarks, indeed, our intention is to continue to work towards ratification of our agreement with Mercosur. And we are well aware of concerns and criticisms surrounding this agreement, not least to the issues linked with deforestation of Amazon. Correspondingly, we are already engaging with Mercosur countries' authorities, notably Brazil authorities, to discuss what additional commitments Mercosur countries can take in the area of fight against climate change, in the area of stopping the deforestation of Amazon, so that we can then work towards successful implementation of the agreement. And I would say the reactions from Mercosur countries are positive. They are ready to engage in this work and ready to indeed do those additional commitments, notably on deforestation. And we hope that that will pave a way towards successful ratification of agreement. We are also working in close cooperation with Portuguese presidency right now, which is very active in actually supporting and advancing this agreement.
Thank you. Next question goes to WEIHUA. WEIHUA, please take the floor.
First is, the Eurostat statistic agency said China has replaced the U.S. as EU's largest trade partner last year. So what do you think the trend is going to be? You're talking about the CHEN investment agreement. China has also called on EU to start talks on FTA. So is this something you are thinking about? Second is that have you heard from the new U.S. administration how they are going to deal with all those Trump's punitive tariffs, such as on steel, aluminum, including, punitive tariffs mainly on China, which have impact on EU globally? Thank you.
Thank you. So on our cooperation in China, it's clear that China's role in the global economy has increased very substantially over the last decades, and China is on the course to become world's largest economy in the coming years. So clearly the engagement with China is very important in this regard. So right now we have concluded in principle comprehensive agreement on investment. And already there we have envisaged the next step in our cooperation with China, which would be the work on investment protection agreement. So that's probably the next practical step as we say forward. And we also hope for China's constructive engagement on the work on the WTO reform, because there are many issues which needs to be addressed, which are to the extent also addressed in our comprehensive agreement on investment, questions regarding the level playing field, questions regarding the market access, the role of state-owned enterprises in the economy and how they adhere to the principle of competitive neutrality, forced technology transfers, intellectual property rights, just to give some examples. So we hope for China's constructive engagement in all those questions. Well, as regards the US tariffs, well, indeed, we already have signaled from the EU side that we want to engage very closely with US, both on resolving our bilateral trade irritants, but also cooperating closely on the multilateral issues, including WTO reform. Well, as regards the tariffs, we have signaled from the EU side our willingness to suspend tariffs from both sides, of course aiming at elimination of these tariffs, and that concerns both steel and aluminium tariffs and tariffs imposed as a part of Airbus-Boeing dispute. Well, as you know, the new US trade representative is not confirmed yet, so we expect those negotiations to start in earnest once the new US trade representative will be in place.
Thank you. The next one in the list is Jérôme. Jérôme, please. Jérôme, can you please press speak because we cannot hear you?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I don't think you can see me, but maybe you can hear me. But and I put the camera on. Yeah, sorry about that. So, Executive Vice President, you'll remember earlier this week that the head of the European Stability Mechanism, Mr. Regling, was talking about the dominance of the US dollar vis-a-vis the euro, and I suppose a good example of this relates to the inability of businesses in the European Union that wish to do legitimate trade with Iran. They're being blocked from doing so. And, you know, I suppose Iran is a political question and so on, but it's also a big trade question, because I've been speaking to an economist who pointed out that Iran has a population of more than 82 million people. And before the US sanctions, they were talking about, you know, they were signing contracts with Airbus and EU car makers and so on. So, like, there's big business to be had there. Now Iran says that Joe Biden is dragging his feet in terms of the going back into the Iran nuclear deal. So if you could just talk a little bit perhaps about that US dollar issue and the fact maybe the euro needs to become more dominant. I'm sort of paraphrasing Mr. Regling, but that's more or less what he was saying, and the potential there with countries like Iran that so far have been impeded because of the US position.
I think this is more. These are more questions concerning not today's trade policy review, but our recently published communication on our, so to say, external economic outlook, including questions concerning the strengthened international role of the euro, because indeed that is one of the policy directions we are working already since 2018, and there are many positive developments. And we are committed to continue this work to strengthen the international role of the euro, including in international trade for invoicing, including in developing of energy benchmarks, including as international reserve currency, and also developing pan-European instant payment systems and using euro more in payments also across, not only within the EU, but also outside the EU. So this work is ongoing, and this definitely will help to strengthen the resilience of European economy and also indeed make European companies less dependent on US dollar transactions. Another element which we are assessing in this communication is how to strengthen the resilience of European economy, European companies against the illegal application of third country, illegal extraterritorial application of third country sanctions. For this we have a blocking statute which we are looking how to update it, and looking also at what are other policy tools at this disposal. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is for Tom. Tom, please. It seems there is a problem with your mic.
Okay. Now?
Now it's
Do
working.
you hear me?
Yes. Now it's working.
Okay.
Yes.
Good afternoon, Vice President Tom Weingartner from Power News. I've got a question on this. As I understood, you want to make a condition for new trade agreements that countries respect their commitments in the Paris Agreement. Does this mean at the end that, for example, developing countries that do not commit or do not fulfill their commitments would lose their preferential access to the European market?
Yeah, so what we are outlining right now is the question that when we are negotiating free trade agreements with third countries, as European Commission, we need to receive negotiating guidelines from member states, and what we are emphasizing that we will seek that the adherence to Paris Agreement and meeting the commitments as regards Paris Agreement is essential element in those free trade negotiations. And there is already example that was the case in our latest negotiations between EU and UK. As regards unilateral preferences, which we are granting in a context of general system of preferences and general system of preferences plus and everything but arms initiative, we will be soon starting also the review of a general system of preferences, where indeed we will seek also to strengthen the sustainability of how we are implementing general system of preferences, but this review has not started yet, so it's premature now to comment on exact tools and instruments which we could use in this regard.
Thank you. The next one is Jana. Jana, please.
Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Executive Vice President, what struck me in reading the document is that there is fairly little actually that is said on Asia, especially post-CHEN. I would have imagined that the EU wanted to think about what it does with the rest of the region in terms of trade policy. Could you elaborate more on this? What are you going to do with Asia more concretely? And is the EU abandoning its promise to Taiwan to start investment agreement negotiations after the conclusion of CHEN with mainland China? Thank you.
Yeah, so as regards our engagement with Asia, definitely we will continue our engagement with Asia. There are already a number of free trade agreements we have in the region with Japan, with Vietnam, with Singapore. We are now negotiating agreements with Australia and New Zealand, and we signal that we are willing to successfully conclude those negotiations. Already mentioned after the next step on comprehensive agreement on investment, which is now concluded in principle, but still needs to be ratified. As a next step, we see the work on investment protection agreement, and that's actually reflected in the CHEN itself. And we are also assessing the impact of regional comprehensive economic partnership agreement, which has been recently concluded in the region, and what impact it has also for EU-Asia trade relations. So certainly we'll continue our engagement with Asia. Recently, also to mention, we had a high-level economic dialogue between EU and India. And so we are also exploring options, what can be done, among other things, in the area of trade in a view of EU-India summit, which will take place in May. So this work will continue, and as regards work on investment, cooperation on investment between EU and Taiwan, there are also well-established work streams which we will continue.
Thank you. The next one for a question is Sarah Ann. Sarah Ann, please. Sarah Ann.
Can you hear me?
Sarah Ann.
Yes, we can hear you now.
Yes,
we can hear you
perfect.
now.
All right. Thank you. And Executive Vice President, could you please tell us some more about what paths you're currently envisaging to make trade and sustainable development chapters more effective and more enforceable? And also just a quick question on to what extent can CHEN be a mixed agreement? Thank you.
On the first question on implementation and enforceability of trade and sustainable development chapters, indeed that's reflected in our communication. So we advanced the review of the action plan of implementation and enforcement of TSD chapters. So this review was initially foreseen for 2023, but we will start it already this spring. And in parallel, we will launch a comparative study to assess what are the options, ways of having a link between fulfillment of the commitments in a TSD chapter and tariff liberalization. And it will be outcome of this review and the results of this study on which we will be basing our next steps. So this issue is clearly on agenda and well reflected in our communication. Well, on specific nature of CHEN, whether it's mixed or EU-only agreement, it's now premature to say. We are normally determining the legal basis once the process of legal scrutiny of the documents is concluded.
Thank you. Next question for Catherine. Catherine, please.
Hello.
We saw you, but we lost you, Catherine. Please try again.
Okay.
Yes.
Is that working now? Yes. Okay, sorry. I missed the beginning of the question, so I hope this question has not already been asked. But in the document, I can only see one very short reference to the carbon border adjustment mechanism. So given that this document, this communication, is all about, or at least partly about sustainable trade policy, do you see that as a central plank of a future policy? And if so, why is there so little on it in this communication?
Yeah, as regards carbon border adjustment mechanism, it's something which has already been clearly announced and communicated. in the framework of European Green Deal. It's reflected also in a Commission's work program. So in a sense, we do not need to announce the carbon border adjustment mechanism because it's already announced and work is already well advanced. Right now, there is a feasibility study ongoing on different options, how exactly carbon border adjustment mechanism could be introduced, and there seems to be some convergence that the direction is probably linked with so-called notional emission trading system. And we are planning legislative proposal for the middle of the year. So the angle which is reflected on carbon border adjustment mechanism in the trade policy review communication is with a need to ensure that the carbon border adjustment mechanism is compatible with WTO rules, so compatible with our international obligations, and the need to engage with our partners on this work stream. So to give example, we already had some first exchanges with new US administration in this regard. Just a few days ago, I had a conversation with a new Treasury Secretary, Janet Yellen, where we exactly discuss, among other things, the question of carbon border adjustment mechanism and how we could cooperate with US in setting it up and ensuring that it's introduced in a way that it's compatible with the WTO rules and our international obligations.
Thank you. Next question goes for Alex. Alex, please.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Executive Vice President. I had a question about CHI, actually, or more sort of thematically about CHI. I was just wondering whether you felt personally, as in charge of trade, that the ratification of that would require that China sign on very concretely to the forced labor elements of the International Labor Organization statutes, because there seems to be a bit of ambiguity on that, and the Macron-friendly MEPs are coming out from Renew, the French delegation from Renew, are saying that it clearly has to be ratified, it has to be approved. It's not just talk, it's not just commitments, it's a real ratification by the Chinese of this. And I was just wondering if you could clarify that issue. And I guess in a broader sense, as I just was wondering whether you believe that CHI needs to reflect European values on human rights, on green policy, on all those things, or as we kind of hear from EAS and other places, is CHI part of this holistic approach to China, that China is a special, complicated partner, and so therefore on CHI, maybe we need to tell the MEPs, hey guys, you know, let's be cool on this because, you know, China's complicated and this is just one element of the whole holistic approach to China. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So as regards comprehensive agreement on investment, we also have a sustainable development chapter in this agreement, which foresees that China will take continued and sustained effort towards ratification of fundamental ILO conventions dealing with forced labor. So this level of commitment is the same as we have in recent free trade agreements, but the difference is that this is not a free trade agreement, it's a more narrow, more targeted agreement, yet the level of commitments from China is the same, and it's the first time China enters in these kind of commitments with international partner. And recently we also had a panel ruling in our trade dispute with South Korea, where we have the same commitment by South Korea, and where the panel ruling was very clear that this commitment does not mean only process, but it means that at the end of the day, those conventions need to be ratified and implemented. So that's the state of play specifically on ILO conventions. Of course, there are other work streams how we need to deal with questions of human rights abuses and forced labor. And we also outlined it in our trade policy review communication that we are advancing, preparing a legislative proposal on compulsory due diligence, where EU companies will be obliged to do the diligence to ensure that they are not sourcing goods or services which are produced with substantial environmental or human rights violations, which obviously includes forced labor. And we are also impact assessing in this context the possibility to also prohibit placement of in the EU market, so basically stopping at the border goods produced with forced labor. And talking more broadly on human rights violations, I also would remind that we, since December, have in place EU global human rights sanctions regime, which allows for the EU to come with targeted sanctions against companies or individuals which are engaged in serious human rights breaches.
Thank you. The next question goes to Philip. Philip, please.
Hello, Philip Blenkinsop of Reuters. Thank you for taking my question. There's a lot in the trade policy review about the WTO, and there are a series of kind of headline, I think they're called headline actions. They relate to kind of, I guess, the EU's desire for whether it be reforms, such as on sustainable development, such as on state subsidies, also kind of progress, whether it be on the appellate body or on digital kind of e-commerce. I just wondered two things. One, there are a series of obviously of actions, of wishes. What is really the priority, or what urgently needs to be done? And also, could you just say what grounds, given the track record of the WTO over the past 26 years, what is your reason for optimism that some of these things can be achieved?
Indeed, on WTO, that's exactly the issue that we see that there are substantial problems in functioning of the WTO. It concerns both its negotiating function, its monitoring function, its dispute settlement function. So that's why WTO reform is needed. And in our document, we provide a quite detailed outline of different elements which we think need to be addressed in a context of WTO reform. Why we think it's now a good moment to start this work? Well, we have a new momentum with a new Director General of the WTO who is committed to work on WTO reform. We have new administration in US, which is also committed to multilateralism, and so will not continue the policy of Trump administration, which was disengaging from multilateral institutions. So I think it all provides for a good starting point for those negotiations. It's clear that we will need to build a broad consensus, so we plan to reach out to broadly to WTO membership, so it concerns not only US but also China, India, African countries, Ottawa Group, other members, because we need to build a consensus around this, and of course it's not going to be easy, but we think we have right now a good starting point. Well, in terms of prioritization or what can be achieved sooner, probably there is one issue which can be resolved relatively quickly. Depends how what approach the new U.S. administration will take. This concerns notably the blockage of the appellate body. Why appellate body is now not functioning is that U.S. previous administration, Trump administration, was blocking nominations to appellate body. So just deblocking this process of nominations would help to restore the functioning of the appellate body. Of course, we are aware of U.S. criticism towards the way appellate body is functioning, and we share some of this criticism, so we are ready to look at the ways how to improve it. But that's probably is something which is feasible as an early deliverable.
Thank you. I see there are just 2 more hands raised, so we are reaching the end. First, NAWAB, please.
Yes, thank you very much. Nawab Khan from the Kuwait News Agency. Mr. Executive Vice President, how do you see the future of trade relations between the EU and the 6-member Gulf Cooperation Council? And secondly, how do you see the chances of the resumption of FTA negotiations between the 2 blocs? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for this question. In our communication, we have not specifically outlined or specified our future cooperation with Gulf Cooperation Council, as we have not outlined and specified our future relations with many different countries in the world. So actually we just were relatively selective in which specific relationships we emphasize in this communication, but this does not mean that we would not engage with other countries and other partners in the world, and that definitely concerns also our cooperation with Gulf Cooperation Council. So we are open for engagement and open to seek ways for future cooperation.
Thank you. And the last question for Mas. Mas, please. You need to change the mic source because we cannot hear you, Mas.
Oui, vous m'entendez là?
Ça marche maintenant.
Ça va?
Ça marche.
Ok, voilà, merci. Oui, bonjour, je suis le vice-président de l'exécutif, M. Dombrovskis. J'avais des questions concernant l'Organisation mondiale du commerce, mais apparemment mon collègue d'avant m'a marché sur la langue et vous avez répondu à toutes les questions que j'avais déjà préparées. Maintenant, je vais orienter le débat sur l'Afrique. Sur la révision de votre politique commerciale, il y a des aspects qui concernent le continent africain. Vous êtes passé très rapidement sur l'Afrique. Est-ce que vous pouvez revenir plus en détail pour qu'on sache exactement ce que vous envisagez de faire vis-à-vis de l'Afrique, sachant qu'il y a une zone de libre-échange économique qui a été mise en place et qui devrait normalement faciliter vos échanges avec le continent africain, puisque au lieu de traiter avec des pays de façon unilatérale, bilatérale plutôt, vous traitez avec un bloc de pays, 54 pays. Je crois que ça devrait quand même vous intéresser, et que je sache, l'Union européenne n'a pas encore précisé sa position ou en tout cas une appréciation concernant la mise en place de cette zone de libre-échange. Merci.
Thank you for this question. As regards Africa, as I mentioned also in the introductory remarks, we see our engagement with EU neighborhood and Africa as priority areas. So clearly, We are willing to engage closely with Africa because also if you look at the economic developments, demographic tendencies, the role of Africa in the global economy will continue to rapidly increase. So as regards specific engagements, in a shorter term, we will work on further developing both in content and in geographical coverage our economic partnership agreements. We will work bilaterally with some countries if they are willing to engage in or so to say advance our work on free trade agreements. There are some negotiations which are, well, currently one could say stalled. As regards the continental free trade, African continental free trade area, actually we support this initiative, and we have been discussing also it, for example, in recent, well, not so recent anymore, but EU and African Union college-to-college meeting. So from EU side, we are supporting and willing to facilitate this continental free trade area in Africa. Of course, we are aware that there are still many challenges which needs to be overcome before it really becomes functional. So indeed, one can say that as a longer-term goal, we see continent-to-continent free trade agreement. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have now reached the end of the press conference. I would like to thank the EVP for his availability and his clear explanations, also the interpreters and the logistical staff that have been helping us. Have a nice afternoon.